our basic story is that we both came from insurance, so we had no farming background whatsoever. And I think the point about that for me is to make fun of that we're doing this partially, but also that what we're doing isn't rocket science. What we're doing is primarily what we brought to the table was sales and marketing. We know how to go out to people, giving talks and engaging people and being accountable for their food and what that can mean to their families and their communities and local food and farmers, and how each individual person can, one at a time, make a big difference by making a different choice. The internal kind of story was that we read Omnivore's Dilemma. We're doing insurance, minding our own business, and my son brought home Omnivore's Dilemma from school. And then he said, here's the book the parents are supposed to read, and then you go back to school, the parenting on. So I read started reading it, and I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Because I had no idea about food. So I called Craig and said, you have to hear this. And I read him the first chapter, and then he read the second chapter out loud, and we started finishing through the book. And it was shocking. We jumped on the internet and we're looking up, because we had no idea the food system was this bad. Not a clue. We didn't come from anything about this. We came from insurance. That's pretty much not involved in anything else. When you're an insurance person, in my opinion, you're kind of plastic and going that way. And there's no connection to anything, homeopathic, to health, to healing, to anything when you're in insurance. And it's not that it's bad. Insurance has a really good place, and it was a good career, but there's nothing like this shows up. And so it was so shocking. And we went to farmers markets. I got a job with the guy, or not a job, I just went and worked in his stall at the Civic Center a few times. And I was just amazed at how little healthy food is available, like real local, healthy, unadulterated, not from Mexico, sprayed coming into the country, stamped incorrectly food, brought out in bags, poured into the organic table that's local. Like food out there that doesn't come from here that says it does. It's just rampantly bad. And it got worse and worse, and so I kept complaining. And my 9-year-old one day, after about 3 months, he said, Mom, you gotta shut up or do something about this. And he never uses that word, and of course it got my attention. He doesn't use that word because he fears me, as he should. And he said, you gotta do something about it, or stop talking, like just get a farm, but nobody invites us to dinner anymore. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, well, we don't go to Kim or Linda's anymore because all you do is talk about bad food. And I'm like, that is not true. So of course I'm bold, pick up the phone, I call my friend Kim and say, what's up with this? And she's silent. Okay. And she said, well, that's all you do. You and Craig come over and you talk about how the slaughtering and the pesticides and stuff and how bad all the food is, and we're trying to serve you dinner. And I never put that together. As sensitive as I am, we never kind of figured that one out. And I'm just like, oh, that is bad. And she said, yeah, that's why nobody invites you over to dinner anymore, because you can't get out. In her comment was, the best one that kind of got my attention was, you're a fanatic, a person who won't shut up and won't listen, or won't change their mind and won't shut up. That's it. Not willing to change your mind and won't shut up. And that was true, we weren't. Sometimes that's a good thing, because it ended up with this great farm. So I hung up and I said, fine, I'll do my own farm. And so we spent a year looking for property around the area. It's in between Petaluma and Marin, and it's only 2 miles off the freeway, so it's a really close drive. And then for the city, it'd take you probably an hour. You guys spend a little less, 45 minutes to get there, and you're in this beautiful, it's like you're out in the middle of nowhere, and yet you just left Novato, 10 minutes, so it's a really easy little drive. And we realized that, number one, what we wanted to do is educate people of what all the stuff we had learned. By this point, I knew a ton. I know so much about food and how it's raised and what the bad stuff is, and meat glue and the pink slime. You've read about that recently. And we knew so much stuff about food by then. I was an expert compared to my friends. They knew nothing, like I knew nothing. And so I knew a ton compared to them. And within 5 days, we had 150 little chicks in the first little brooder that my son and I built. And then a couple of days later, I built with some fencing this little area for little piglets, and we got some baby piglets from Tamales that were all unadulterated, no vaccines, no drugs or anything, and same with the chicken, and kind of began. And in about, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks down, it's like, okay, now here's our strength, sales and marketing. So on your email, if you put an A and you start typing a name, all the A people come up. So I invited everybody that was under A through Z. And, and I invited them all out to the farm on the first Sunday and said, hey, come on out. We want to talk to you about what we've been talking about for the last year. We finally have something to show you. And it was just fabulous. We had 200 people the first Sunday, which was insane. And there was nothing to show them except the baby chicks and the baby pigs. And that was more than what they expected, because they were people like me that had no clue. And just to sit in that, we didn't have the tent in the barn, we didn't have anything. The people were just sitting around or standing in nothing. Nothing was there. There was no garden, nothing was going on.
There's some Holstein bulls.
And that's the other, I'll get to that. So anyway, that's how we got our first customers, would be those people once those chickens were ready to go to be processed, and that's who I was going to sell to, and it worked from there. But that's how the business began. So the funnest part was, on the first day we got to the farm though, the people that owned it before us had a cow that was having twins, and knowing nothing about cows at all. I knew about what cows did with grass and what we do there around regenerative soil design and growing perennial grasses to carbon sequester and all that. But I didn't know anything about the actual cow. I'm a pig connoisseur. I know everything there is to know about chickens, laying, and broilers, but I just didn't know the cow thing yet. Craig was kind of taking care of that. And so there's this cow, and she's having these 2 babies, and they have called the vet, because it's twins, and supposedly for some reason the female will always be born stillborn, because the male and the testosterone wash and all this stuff, nasty, somehow takes everything the female needs. And so there's some other guys in here, I'll glare at all of you. Somehow it's your fault. Anyway, so there's this cute little boy cow laying there, and sweetest thing on the planet. Oh my gosh, he just stands up, and he can't be cuter, right? Little tiny itty bitty sweet face. And the guy says, so can you just drop him off at Rancho on the way in? And I'm like, Rancho, click, 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 that's a slaughterhouse. What are you doing? What are you talking about? What do you mean, taking the slaughterhouse? Why would you do that? Oh my God, well, you gotta save me, so cute, can I have him? And so we ended up with this little guy, and he says you can't have him by himself, he has to have a mate, so I'll bring another one tomorrow. So he brings us 2, so now I've got 2. And they are to die for. And we've got these milk bottles, and we hand feed them, and they're amazing. Now the mom is gone, but they did leave me these 2 big jugs of colostrum to feed them, which was pretty cool. So we feed them all that stuff, and a couple of days, and finally they're up and they're walking around, they're healthy, we get to feed them every day, and we have these tours that we're doing right in the beginning on Sundays, 10 to 3 on the hour for free, and they're walking along with me. And they're following me like I'm their mother. Now the downside to that is, as they got a little bit bigger, they instinctively know who their mother is. There's that whole, what do you call that? Imprinting. They imprinted me as their mom, and they know where others are. So the day that I leaned over like this to reach something, and I had a cow come up and grab my breast, the words that came out of my mouth because of the pain were unbelievable. It hurt so bad. And then the other thing they do is, like, I was standing there, like this, looking at something, and they'll come right up, because they come up underneath the mama's legs, and they push, like a baby will push on a breast to get the milk to come in. And that would just throw me, because I'm not expecting it. And they come up and they go, boom, and you kind of fall for it. That was special. So I'm walking around doing these tours all the time, which was a lot of fun. And at the end of one of the days of tours, this man comes up and he says, I want to introduce myself. I'm Albert Strauss. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so honored. This is amazing. You're amazing. Oh my gosh, what do I say? And he says, you're great. You did all these great things. Could I talk to you for a minute? And I said, sure. He said, privately? And I said, sure. Why? What's happening? What's up? And I'm thinking, he wants to go into business with us or something or whatever.
Everybody know who Albert Strauss is?
The Strauss Organic Milk. He's like the big organic guy up in Marin. And they've been there for 35 or 40 years or something, old family dairy. And he says, those two cows, because that's not what they're called, but what do I know? Those two cows, that are following you around and everything, they're boys. And I said, oh, okay. Blonde moment. Okay, I'm getting something. I'm missing whatever it is, but I know there's something. He says, so they're 6 months old now, so they're pretty big, right? About this big. They're cute as heck. They found me everywhere. What's the big deal? All these little kids get to feed them and pet them, and you have to watch out for their feet a little bit. But what's the big deal? And he says, so they're bulls. They're not just boys. They're bulls. And I'm like, okay. Still, what do you need to tell me here? And he said, let me put it to you this way. When they decide that they want to jump on top of something and you're the only female around, it will be you. How's that working for you? And I got the picture. And he said, they're ready. And any minute now, 6 months forward, you can't have them out in public like this. You have to put them behind a fence or they're going to hurt somebody and you're going to be the one. Because they think, you're going to be the female. You have to not do this anymore. So we put them behind this fence where the kids could still walk up, and they were in this big pasture and the kids could feed them. And it was a week later, and I walked up with a group of kids, and one of the bulls put its head down and started doing the thing and just slammed into the gate. And it just scared the heck out of me. It was just terrible. And so we were very lucky. And not to mention, there were milk cows. These are not meat cows, they're milk cows, they're Holsteins. Big difference. And so when you go in the store, if you look on the walls, all the painting and stuff that's up there, there's a meat cow up there. Well, the girl that painted it didn't know the difference either, and she painted a milk cow. And there's a very big difference between a milk cow and a meat cow. The milk cow is the one that their meat hangs from them. They have the bones that stick up. They're black and white, cute things, but they hang kind of low and bony. Meat cows are bruisers. I mean, they're big, huge, bouncer-looking like guys, and they've got black eyes if they're Black Angus, and they're really massively big animals. They're not the sweet little clover cow thing at all. So I've learned a lot about theirs, even though our cows now have what we call a zero flight distance, and that means you can walk up to our cows if you walk up slowly, and you can put your hand out and they'll lick your hand, and eventually you can scratch, especially number 1300.
No.
Number 1300 will then, and they'll practically lick your skin off because their tongue's so rough. But you can approach most of them now, and that means they're stress-free. They don't have ATVs running around after them. They don't have dogs biting their ankles. They don't get hurted anywhere. They just walk from pasture to pasture, and they're very happy animals. And that stress-free is what makes animal meat the healthiest. You can, if I had to choose between stress-free or stressed out with antibiotics, or no antibiotics but stressed out, I would take an antibiotic-filled animal that has no stress before I would take the stressed animal. Because a stressed animal has none of the good stuff in its meat. CLAs, omega-3, 6 balance, it can't because it's an acidic-based meat muscle, because the stress causes that just like it does in our bodies. So ongoing stress for an animal living in a cage, living in a pen, in a small feedlot, tucked in kind of thing where they're sitting in crap and it's terrible for them. The stress is worse for them than the drugs they're given. So you might as well just eat, if you could find an animal that has antibiotics and the wormers and all that stuff, it's bad, but at least there's good stuff in their meat too. Versus the stressed animal has nothing, and most likely has all the drugs anyway. But if you had to choose, you want to go for no stress. So the other thing that's really the funny thing that's happened to me, I have two other quick stories for you, is pigs. So we're on tour with the pigs, and this is the first time, right? I've got my first group of piglets that are now, they're this big kind of thing. They're teenager pigs. And they're playing out in the field, and they're great, and they're in the big greens, and they're running, and they're happy as can be, and you can get in and play with them, and the kids love it and everything. So I'm standing there with the group, and this little girl, and it was like a Far Side or whatever, she said, "Mom, what's that?" Now, my response should have been one of an educated, I'm in control, I know what I'm talking about, and I looked at that pig penis, and I'm like, oh my God, what is that? And it just shocked me. And if you've not seen this, they're about this thick. They are about this long,
Oh my God.
or longer, and they're bright pink and they can move in any direction. And it is the creepiest, alienist looking like freaky thing I've ever seen. And it's still, I look at that and I'm like, okay, gotta move on. It just looks wrong, even though Mother Nature and everything. And the other thing that happens with pigs is when the guy finally gets on there, the female, she actually will plant her feet and eventually she pushes back and he steps on top there and does his thing. And then they stop and they just sit there. There's no movement going on. He's not like, humans or dogs or anything. There's nothing going on there. He just sits there. And it goes on for like 30 minutes. And there's always some guy in the group that says, oh, I want to be a pig. Yeah, exactly. You are. I knew somebody would say that. And so that's been an interesting one. The other funny one was I finally realized after about a year and a half, I start to, not belong on the farm, but I started to connect with the land. I started to feel like I kind of really belonged there in a way, some way, whatever that was, but it just felt better. And so I'm on my ATV, I've been up and closed up all the chicken things, and I've come down, I've got my trusty Roland dog with me, who's all white with a little bit of black on his face. He's a little fat, brown, runs like crazy, insane animal. And we're coming down, and I'm going about to drive through this barn to get to the other side. We call it the drive-through barn because we're creative. And as I'm coming up to it, I'm going pretty slow, and there's a little lip there. And as I go over the lip into the barn, and it's getting dark, I look up, and there's a rafter up above, and there's about 30 turkeys up there, wild turkeys. And I frighten them, and they frighten me, and I take my hand off as they come rushing at me, and they shit all over me, right in the air, and it's like a shit storm. And I'm in it, and I was just stunned. And the dog, his response is the perfect one. He rolls in it because he can't be happier. It's poo, it's poultry poo. And he's rolling all over, and he's suddenly so happy he can't stand himself. And I'm like, all right, okay, I've arrived. It doesn't matter to me. So I went in and just took a shower, but it wasn't this icky thing. And it's like, oh, okay, so it's turkey poo. But it was quite the moment. And I thought, okay, this would be good for the newsletter. I could write a story about this one. I just keep going. So, for the most part, what we've done there is we wanted to create, a place where we could raise healthy food and do it sustainably. So we're really close to being profitable. And then we wanted to educate everybody about it. So I wanted to get to people that were like myself that had no idea about their food and let them know, yeah, it costs more than the piece. This steak here is $20. The steak in the store is $10. At least the cost in the store. It's actually costs about $815 for that steak to get created. And I can show you the detail of that, or you can see it, sierraclub.org. And then on that website, you search for the true cost of food, and it has all the, it's a video, an animation that walks through the cost of raising a pound of meat in our big ag society and what that means. And that has all of the backup data below it, so you can look it all up. It's all right there. But it's all the environmental, all the healthcare, all the waste. None of that cost goes into what we pay for in the store. Where we pay for it is in our taxes. It goes to the farm bill. Now, I didn't know any of this. The farm bill in 2008, it was a $16 billion tax bill. And most of that, 75% of it, went to Monsanto and Cargill and the 6 big companies. Then we got a phone call, and we just started, and they said, hey, we're the farm bill, and we've got your money, because you're a farm now. And I'm like, all right, how much are we getting? Because I could use some extra cash. It's $257. I'm like, and you want me to fill out what kind of paperwork? Like a stack of paperwork this deep for $257. And I said, call me later. And so, because it is absurd. All of that money is lobbied into this other big farm bill that goes to these big corporations that have convinced our country that this is the only way we can feed the country and the rest of the world. Number one, we shouldn't feed the world. We should teach it to feed itself where they need to be taught. Number two, we shouldn't feed we shouldn't distribute food like we distribute. Local communities can, through small farming, feed their local communities. The ground around this city can feed this city. Number two, you eat too much meat anyway. Everybody's eating these big, huge chunks of food that are making them sicker. Anyway, we need to eat 80% greens and, a little 10%, the handful of protein that you actually need. And healthy meat, unstressed, healthy meat is actually good for most people. Not everyone and not everybody feels good eating it. And so I do. I feel great when I eat healthy food, but I don't feel good now anymore if I eat bad food, because I can feel it almost instantly when I'm not eating. I can tell there's something in whatever it is that, this is just regular food, and it's food-like substances, as Joel Salatin will say, that's just not real food. So, it was see if we could do it profitably, educate everybody about it, and then duplicate it. Can we duplicate what we're doing? So we're kind of in and out of the duplication phase of that. All the things keep coming up around that. So we have a nonprofit that we started for education because the education piece got too big.
We want to show that you can run a farm profitably and supply consumers sustainably and do it that way. And if we can replicate it, fine. If we make some money ourselves, fine. We thought a lot about just putting money back into the nonprofit if we make it profitable. But I think the profitability aspect is extremely important, because right now people think farmers are poor. And we believe that if you're going to run a farm, it's a big undertaking. You ought to be able to make some significant money. I mean,
Working that hard.
It takes hard work and a lot of skills, and hence we're trying to make that model work.
The chickens were allowed to. We have what we call a farm exemption. We're allowed to process up to 20,000 chickens, which we will never do that many. We do about 200 every 2 weeks. But up to 20,000 chickens a year, we're allowed to do that. Now, I can't sell my chicken in a farmer's market. I can't sell my chicken in a store, restaurant, anything. I can only sell my chicken direct to my customer. So it's hence the CSA. So I can put chicken, beef, and pork, turkey, whatever I want in that, put it in a bag, give you vegetables, and deliver it to you. But I can't sell it in other forms. So it's an exemption, but it's got a lot of controls on it, so I don't become a competitor. The other thing is I can't cut it up. I can't sell chicken breasts or chicken legs or anything like that. So it's really just the whole chicken. So we teach people, so it takes a minute to cut up a chicken if you know what you're doing. It's pretty easy. You can Google that. Chop, and you're done. And so a sharp knife. The pigs and the cows go right into Petaluma, so it's a 3-mile drive to the slaughterhouse. They do one animal at a time, unlike the big slaughterhouses that do big groups of animals, and they use electric paddles to move them along, and they're in these nightmare places, and so they're in pens, and they're shoved around, and frankly, I know that they have good systems where they try to make sure that your meat is what you get back, but we've had by accident some of our one group of our pigs, the sausage part, or the bacon part actually, got sent over to Oakland by accident, and they turned it into nitrate-filled, nasty bacon. Now, they paid for all of it, and everybody was fine with that and everything, but I know in my process, I can tell that's not mine. It doesn't have I just looked at the label and said, that's not ours, why is it here? We even got sent back from one company, lamb. And we don't do lamb. Like, there's lamb in this box. So, it's like that doesn't work. So we're very careful about watching that process. The interesting thing about the slaughter of a cow and a pig and or chicken is there's an environmental group, which I'm always behind trying to do as humane process of killing an animal as possible. No stress. Like, for a cow, they walk up this ramp because there's food there. There's alfalfa or something that they want to eat. And there's a shot, it's a slug right to the head. Well, along comes an environmental group that wants the feedlots who run them through this big, huge process that's horrifying for them. Temple Grandin, heard about her. She made that process more humane so they would have less stress. But once they get there, now they have to be electrocuted first, because the response to we want humane treatment of the animals ended up being electrocuting all of them. And so now they're electrocuted and stunned, and then they're killed. Even a chicken. Now the thing about chicken was interesting is that the chicken, I went to the processing plant. The chicken comes out of the box, the guy picks it up by its legs, puts it on this moving fairly quickly machine thingy, and it grabs its legs, electrocution, cuts its head off. Electrocution, I mean, it's like that quick. There was no need to electrocute it. Its head was getting cut off less than a second later. But the response to, we want you to do this humanely, was turned into that. And the guy that ran Fulton Processing, it's now closed, he said, yeah, it's absurd. It costs us a ton of money, and it doesn't do anything but give them an extra piece of pain. And all they knew was, what the heck, I'm dead. You know, it's like, oh, I'm upside down. And it was, you know, I watched them do it. It was very fast. So there was very little that went on there. With the pigs get the worst of it in our big ag country here, primarily in North and South Carolina. They're literally 10 pigs to a very small pen on cement, nothing comfortable. They can barely move. They like break off their teeth. They cut their ears, they clip off their tail because they are so stressed out, they're biting at each other. And they don't want things to be bite-bitten. And they're dangerous animals because they're highly stressed out and they're big weight, right? They can do all kinds of physical damage to anyone that gets in there with them. So they're raised this way. They're treated so badly. And then we eat that stuff. They don't, the other white meat, that marketing, pig meat actually is rose-colored. That's a happy, healthy out on pasture. So the first time we had one of our pigs, I was sitting down at the table because again, he cooks, and he said, he serves up my dinner. Thank you. And I'm like, oh, and I didn't mean this in a negative way, steak again, And he kind of chuckled, and I cut into it, and I'm like, this isn't steak, this is, what the heck, this is amazing, what is this? I never liked pork, because I didn't like the flavor, just didn't like it. Now it's my favorite, the pork chop. There's something very different in it, and the flavor of it is so flavorful and yummy, and it's because the pigs are happy running around in pasture, and they have one bad moment. We even put food in the trailer that takes them into town. We just put hay along the little walk-up things, and we put food in there, and the ones we want to go in there, we put it in their pasture, and they go in there to sleep. So at 3 a.m., we just drive right into town. There's no braking, stopping, turning, brake rules. We don't stop at the stop signs and stuff because nobody's around. And you just coast right into Rancho, and then they get out. They're in their little pasture, and in the morning they walk in and they do the slug thing. Actually, they've got all the new process. They just changed this a month ago. They don't do the slug thing anymore. They actually put them to sleep with CO2. So they go into this little, like a box with food on the floor, and they close the box up and they fall asleep and die. And that's it. There's no stress, there's no heart attack, there's no loud shots, there's no anything. So it's this new, really sweet process. And then they go up to the butcher when they're done. And the cows just walk up and get the slug to the head. So it's a much different process to do that. And there doesn't need to be, we don't need to do the stuff that we do in Big Ag. It just doesn't need to occur. But we buy into that because we don't know enough about the system. We don't know the questions to ask. We don't know, this one girl once wanted to sell some of her chickens to us. She said, I'm raising them on pasture, come and see. And I said, so what kind of vaccines do you use? You ask the right questions, you find out. Well, we do Merrick's, but I don't do antibiotics. I said, how do you do the Merrick's vaccine? Why do you do that? Well, everybody does that. You can't afford to get wiped out. And I'm like, it's kind of interesting. You might want to look that up. No one can actually identify when anybody got wiped out by Merrick's disease in this area, ever. It's something happened somewhere where someone convinced someone that Merrick's disease was something that could wipe out chickens. Everybody gives this vaccine. And the only place we could get chicks without anything was in Iowa. So we get our chicks day old, shipped overnight, which is against everything we want to do. But it's the only place we could get them without the vaccines. And they're always really healthy. And they're happy, and we put them in the little brooder thing, and they're running around, they're sweet, and then they go out to pasture and live outside all day long, and life is great. And then they have that one moment, you know, where we pick them up, you put them in the little cone, heads off. So it's a 10-second or less done. So there's no suffering. It's more of what the heck's going on kind of idea. The one thing I'll tell you about chickens though, there was one time I watched this chicken jumped out of the pen, the crate that we keep them, we take them off pasture, put them in a crate, bring them down and do the processing. And this one chicken got loose and it's running around. And I thought, okay, we have it set up so chickens can't watch chickens with their heads cut off draining, right? Because who knows what they're really thinking. Well, let me tell you, they're actually not thinking anything. This chicken walked around, and I just watched it instead of grabbing it to protect it. I just watched it because I wanted to know, like, is there a reaction? Does it get freaked out? What's it do? And it just walked around. It just kept walking in and out of things, looking around. It would peck at something on the ground on occasion. Walked over, got into the grass a little bit, came back over to where the chickens are draining after their heads are off. Is right next to this grass area, so we can put everything back into the soil. And it just walked around. It had actually no response and stood around the kill cones, waiting. Like, okay, there's nothing going on here. That's so bizarre. Other animals, I would say, would be completely opposite. If a little pig squeals, all the other pigs come running to see what's going on, and the same with the cows. So totally different situation. And yet the chicken killing's the most humane in the country, whereas not the chicken raising, but the chicken killing, where the cow and the pig is disgusting. And so I would be vegan if I couldn't eat real food and know that it was humanely taken care of that way. But that's that answer.
We want people to understand that real food is live food, and generally something gave up its life so you could live.
All of this land around here for 200 years has been overgrazed, and it was overgrazed by the 6 million cows that were brought up during the gold rush. And so normally what happens with animals is they go across the plains or wherever they are, and they eat as they go forward. And what happens behind them is it rains and that grass grows back. Well, overgrazing means I got 200 or 600 acres and I got my cows out there and they just continue to eat until it's all gone. And the grass never gets to recover. So in order for the grass to recover, you can't just take animals off of it, because the only thing left that grows on this ground anymore is European oak grass. It's annual grass. It comes up and that makes the pretty yellow hills in the fall when everything's dried out. How beautiful it is up in Marin. It's all yellow and it looks like wheat and all of that. Well, that's European oak grass, and it's good food for the cows, but it isn't doing the other part of its job at that point. After it turns yellow, it stops doing the one thing it does better than anything else on the planet, and that's carbon sequester. So remember photosynthesis back in biology class? It takes CO2 out of the air, breaks it into carbohydrates and carbon. The carbohydrates help grow the grass, that's the energy, and then the carbon goes down into the roots and puts it back in the ground. I didn't know this, or I never connected bad CO2, global warming, carbon down into the ground. Grass does that 80% more than any other plant on the planet. Well, it only happens 6 months a year around here, because the European oak grass doesn't allow the perennial grasses, the ones that grow year-round, to grow, because it comes up first. So in January, you get this big European oak grass that grows, and the cows come by and they eat it down. And then the little perennial can stick its head up, and the cow comes by and eats it down. And then it comes by again and eats it down, and then the rain stops and it doesn't get to come up anymore. It's done. Well, what we're doing is we let the European oak grass grow up in the first rains in January, and the cow comes by and it eats it down. And we have our cows compacted into, an area that's about the size of this room, about 35, 40 cows, and about the size of this room, I think. And they have one day on that little plot of grass, and then we have them move. And so they'll take the grass down. And then the perennial grass gets to peak up, and we don't let the cows come back until it's this high. And then the cows come around again, but this time they might be there only half a day, because we watch, and we let them take it down about 8 inches left. There's about 8 inches left. Now when it rains, or as that grass grows, its roots go down as much as it goes up. And so if we keep bringing the cows back, it keeps getting to grow this way. by the time it stops raining, it has 6 foot or more roots, and it gets to the water table and doesn't need rain the other 6 months of the year, and continues to sequester carbon back into the ground. So there's John Wick, who ran the Marine Carbon Project in Acatio with the Berkeley scientist group or whatever. What they found is that they did this measuring over a 3-year period of how much carbon was being put into the ground with this kind of cow management on his 500 acres. We would actually have a 0 carbon footprint in California if we only did that on the ranch lands in Northern California. If that's all we did is this rotation of cows, so the perennial grasses could sequester carbon year round. We wouldn't have to change how we drive and all the stuff, fossil fuels we burn. So could you imagine if we actually did change something? So it's quite a fascinating thing. So on our farm, that's the process that we use, is to be able to grow those perennial grasses year round. Now what's funny is at this point, because it has finally rained, you can see across the street their grass, because they overgraze everything. The cows are loose to go everywhere, and so they eat every little piece of perennial grass that comes up. It never gets past baby grass to get into juvenile grass, and once it's here, it can grow here really fast, and it doesn't get to do this up and down thing. And you can now see it. You can look across, and somebody will say something like, well, it rains more over here. You know, the stupid comments, and like, yeah, that's it. Or you must fertilize. We certainly do. It's called cow manure, chicken manure, and pig manure, and there's a lot of it because they're running around now all over out there. So it makes the grass grow. It regenerates the soil. There's another thing called biochar, which is all biochar is a process, a fast burn process on any kind of biomass, leaves off of a tree. And they take a bunch of that kind of composted biomass, they burn it in a quick flame, so it uses very little fuel to do it. And it looks like a piece of charred coal. And if you look under a microscope, it's a little tiny powder. But if you look at a microscope, it looks like coral. So it has holes. And what it does is actually makes housing for little tiny bugs. So you take this stuff and you can throw it out on a pasture, a grazing land, that's been overgrazed, that's all, the soil's kind of hard pan dead. You throw it out there and it creates little houses for bugs. So the bugs come back, these little tiny microscopic bugs, and when those bugs poo, that creates food for grass to grow. That's what causes the food and any of the plants to grow, is the poo from the microorganisms that live inside those little biochar housing things. And so this is a whole new thing in it's a global, how to cover hundreds of thousands of acres with biochar to regenerate it. And so we get to do a little pilot of doing a couple acres on our grazing land with a smaller firm that's running it just for Sonoma County. So that's kind of cool. It'll be fun to see how quickly it can make a difference there. The kind of fencing we use, you could put up. It's really easy. You could put up right now. And it's just a real simple, flexible pole, and you step on it. It goes into the ground. It has a little clip, and then you have, once you get those up, and you put up, 50 of them, and you just walk along. It takes about an hour. You put those up, and then you take the little wire and hook it at one end, and you just unspool, and you hook it there, and you walk around your thing again. And then you open the little piece over here, and the cows walk in, and you close it. Tomorrow, I'll come over here, and I'll make the next section. And then I'll take that section and put it over here, and you're just moving fencing. So it's very flexible. You use very little equipment. You don't have to build fences. Permanent fencing is really expensive, and once it's up, and if it wasn't right, now what do you do? So this flexible fencing doesn't damage the ground. It doesn't leave permanent scarring. It doesn't do anything like that. So, in a second you can pull that up, and the only thing on our farm would be this fencing that's on the outside of the whole property versus inside. So we don't have anything permanent like that. But that there aren't people that do this rotation with the pigs, chickens, and cows. The cows will go through and eat the grass. The chickens come behind them and lay all the manure and pick through the manure of the cow for the flies and the fly larvae, because it hatches after 5 to 7 days. Tons of details. And they scratch the manure to help the fertilizer spread out more, so they're very efficient with that. And then you can bring pigs in depending on what you're after, because pigs are specific. Right now where we have them is digging up in an area we want them to dig through in the mud to get rid of rocks, dig up the rocks so we can pull the rocks out and eventually plant there where all the little pigs are at.